Thanks so much, Tim. It's always a pleasure to be part of Share Cafe. I'm going to use the next 10 minutes to introduce the company to those that don't know us. I'm going to highlight our half-year financial results, which we just released this morning. And I'm going to discuss our plans looking forward, particularly in that post-COVID era. So if I can go through to my first slide. So Genetic Signatures is a 20-year-old listed company. We make molecular or PCR-based tests to identify infectious diseases. So these are the microorganisms that infect humans. They make us sick. Some of them have a pretty high mortality rate, so it's really important to get in there and recognize them and accurately diagnose them. The tests we make are molecular. They're the gold standard test. They directly detect the nucleic acids of the organism. So they detect the DNA or the RNA rather than traditional methods which have to grow up the organisms before identifying them. So we're focused now on the commercialization of these infectious disease detection kits. They're in kit form. They utilize our proprietary 3-base technology. And this was a technology that we developed here in Australia, and it's designed to change the organism's DNA sequence, and it makes it easier to detect. And the change in sequence means that our 3-base technology is not affected by the most common mutations that we are seeing in SARS and other microorganisms. The kits we make are low cost, they're rapid, they allow accurate detection of infectious diseases. The result informs doctors to help them make a diagnosis, and ultimately our test kits help the doctor do that, and ultimately we save lives. We do make these kits under the EasyScreen brand. They're available in most major markets, global markets. We are concentrating our expansion into the very large European and US markets. We made test kits long before COVID. We've been selling versions of our kits for about 12 years. And we just reported this morning record first half results of almost 22 million in sales for the half, and that's up 17% as compared to the first half of last year. We do have a 4-year CAGR of 93%. We do have labs around the world using us every day. We're profitable. We have 37.5 million in cash. We have no debt, and we just reported a 4.7 million profit for the half year. So we have a footprint now in those target markets of Europe and the US. We are building off the considerable home-based success that we've had, and our 3-base technology is key to that. And it's now a trusted and proven technology, and it helps us to make what we call syndromic kits. And you can see that on the next slide, what they do. And they actually allow labs to test for a really large number of clinically relevant organisms, pathogens. And respiratory is the best example. We all know that the symptoms are sore throat and runny nose, but right now it might well be SARS-CoV-2, but traditionally it could be influenza, which also has a high mortality rate. It could be rhinovirus, RSV. The tests that we make look for all of these infections in the one patient, effectively one test that can look for all of these. So in fact, we detect over 20 pathogens from just the one patient samples, and we do this in hours. We have tests for over 100 organisms. Of course, it includes SARS-CoV-2, but other disease states too, which are really important because they cover things like gastroenteritis or antibiotic-resistant bacteria and many more. But importantly, we have one common method, and it works for all of our kits in exactly the same way. So at once we have a customer on and they're using one of our tests, adopting additional tests that we put out is relatively easy. And the sales model itself is straightforward. Our customers are testing diagnostic laboratories. They're high throughput, mid to high throughput, and they order kits from us. They pay us on standard terms. They use the test, and they're generally reimbursed through government subsidies. In addition to making the assays, we also supply Genetic Signatures branded instruments, and you can see them on the slide there on the bottom right. And these are the printers in our printer and cartridge model. And importantly, we have quadrupled the number of these Genetic Signatures instruments that we have in the field over the last 2 years. And these instruments are revenue generating. So we're in a very nice position where we have a much broader install base given our recent success over the last 2 years. And that success is really reflected in our increasing revenue, which on the next slide I can take you through, where you can really see that revenue growth that we've had. We recently reported 9.4 million in revenue in the last quarter alone. You can see that in the last column, and 21.1 21.8 million in the half of this year. So that's more than 4.5 times our entire annual revenue in FY19, and that's just in the last 6 months of this financial year. We're certainly now in expansion phase. We are focused on Europe and the US, and we have international sales team who have already had success signing up customers for our tests, not only for COVID tests, but for full respiratory screening, as well as our enteric range of kits. And this is where it's important to realize that the quadrupling of the instruments that we've had is really a great base that we can continue to support the future growth of genetic signatures. And we're in a very strong position to execute our expansion plans. So the next slide, I'll go through a little more on our P&L for the half year. We did report a 4.7 million profit for the half year. And it's important because this is while we were growing and expanding the business. So we've made investments in personnel, extra personnel, particularly overseas, into clinical trials to support new product registrations as they come through. We've invested in new instruments and we've invested in new technology. So while we responded quickly to the emergence of COVID, SARS-CoV-2, we gained many new customers. But it's really important to remember here that genetic signatures produces many tests in addition to a COVID test. And that the next slide will detail those tests that we have. The majority of our revenue came from our 2 most mature products, and they're the enteric and the respiratory screening kits. They're right up there on the top. They have TGA and CE-IVD accreditation. We're also seeking FDA clearance for our enteric protozoan kit, which is currently at the trial stage, which will give us clearance to sell into the US. The key here for me, or from a revenue point of view, is that there are 7 additional products that have some regulatory registrations or are coming through the development pathway or commercialization pathways. And these will all be revenue generating, and they all work in exactly the same way with many compatible instruments that are already in the field. So we've shifted our focus now. We're well and truly focused on beyond COVID, and the next slide will show you the potential of one of the kits I've mentioned. This is our enteric protozoan kit, where in the US we're doing trials to support an FDA clearance. And we do believe that our product will displace traditional testing for parasite detection. The traditional test is looking down a microscope and identifying, micro protozoan cysts. We know there are 5.5 million of these traditional tests that are done in the US each year. We know they're labor intensive, they require trained technicians, they have 7-day plus turnaround times, and they're quite insensitive, sometimes 50% sensitivity. Whereas we have a comprehensive molecular product, it can identify 8 of the most common protozoan infections in just a few hours. And we're aiming to win 40% market share over the next 5 years. And that's roughly 2 million tests per annum. We know there are existing reimbursements of $260 US. So this single product in the US alone has the potential to generate tens of millions in annual revenue for us. And it's obviously that reason that we're very excited to finish the trials and submit our application to the FDA as soon as possible. It's certainly part of our strategy looking forward in a post-COVID era where we have new products coming through. And on the next slide, I'll focus on looking beyond COVID, where we are already leveraging the gains that we've made in the last 2 years. So we do have an established direct sales force in Europe and in the US. We also use distributors in Europe. We're targeting those newly acquired customers with the other approved tests that we had before the pandemic, and that includes non-respiratory targets. So we actually have 5 additional kits. They have regulatory clearance. We can offer those to the new customers that we won who are currently only screening for SARS-CoV-2. And of course, we have more kits in development. In terms of product development, we are investing in a next generation instrument. We're excited by that as we do believe it will be a game changer. It will be specific to 3-base, our technology, and it will be sample to answer. We're working on newer technologies, and these technologies will decrease the time to result even further. And we've recently filed a provisional patent to cover off these new inventions. We will continue to progress regulatory submissions. As I outlined, we're developing new kits, which again will be revenue generating. So I'll wrap it up on the next slide. I'll just summarize the investment opportunity in genetic signatures. Firstly, it's our revenue growth. We have achieved maiden first year profit last financial year. We're profitable in the first half of this year that we just reported. There remain very significant market opportunities for us, particularly in Europe and the US, and combined, they're estimated to be around 70% of the world market. We have invested in product development and expansion, as I outlined. And finally, we have a proven business model. We have increased recognition of genetic signatures and our technology in those much larger international markets. We have a unique technology that was developed in Australia and one that we're exceptionally proud of. I'm happy to pause there for any questions.
Thank you, John. Bang on time. So this rapid antigen test environment, it's gone from where you couldn't get them and you could only buy them at Easy Mark for too much money, and now they kind of flooded the market. At the same extent, the school environment is obviously buying a lot of these kits. How does this impact your business model? How have you evolved and how have you operated in this sort of environment?
It's a good question, Tim. The demand for our tests is continued into this quarter, as we outlined in the last quarterly, even though, as you say, many of the rapid antigen tests are used. But I think it's really important here to recognize that the molecular tests that we make, the PCR tests that genetic signatures make, are the gold standard test. They do directly detect the genetic information of the organisms. PCR tests are known for their accuracy in terms of sensitivity, in terms of specificity. And we have, PCR tests are about 99% sensitive. Rapid antigen tests are 85%, some are greater, but I just saw one the other day that said highly sensitive, positive result within 7 days of symptoms. At that point, you've infected a lot of people. The current usage of the rapid antigen tests, I believe it's just a band-aid. They're not regulated. Nobody watches you on how you perform the test, how you stored the tests, how you took the swab, which is the most important part. As I said, I think a band-aid solution at best. The market will return to the gold standard. And particularly as we're going to move into winter here, we will see a return of influenza. We will see other targets coming from the Northern Hemisphere. We know swine flu is currently in Europe and the borders are open and they will make their way down here like they have every other year. Rhino will be circulating, RSV will be circulating. A rapid antigen test cannot test for all of these things together. They just can't do it. So it will change where you have symptoms and being tested for SARS-CoV-2 alone is no longer sufficient. Our type of test that can test for that, flu, RSV, rhino, in addition to COVID, is exactly what we need, and we're ready to go.
And there's a common question here, like what proportion or percentage of your revenue actually came from COVID testing over the last 12 months?
Look, the majority came from respiratory enteric. They are the two most mature products. And certainly when we have outbreaks or new waves of infection, our revenue from COVID only goes up. But our strategy is to convert all of those COVID only tests back into multiplex screening. And this is already happening. We have examples in Australia and in Europe, in the UK, where customers that came on only looking for SARS-CoV-2 have expanded into the full respiratory screen. And that's really important because we know there are other tests that are circulating. So we do expect a return where we see the gastroenteritis revenue increase back to pre-pandemic levels. In fact, they've already returned. Depending on the wave and where we are in the world. And we have new placements of those enteric kits in Europe and in the UK. So we certainly will expect a rebalancing as the world shifts away from COVID-only testing back into sort of the most modern test you can get, which is multiplexed PCR testing.
And post this COVID environment, what's the biggest opportunity for genetic signatures? Is it do you look at addressing a disease first, or do you look at kind of the market opportunity?
Look, we do look at both. Some disease opportunities are very underserved, and some, we have a great solution. I mean, I mentioned gastroenteritis testing. That's an approved kit. It's still largely done via traditional methods in Europe and in the US. And Australia's been an early adopter for these molecular tests. So I expect the other countries to follow suit. We have tests that can identify antimicrobial resistance. These are the superbugs, antibiotic resistance, and I'm excited by that opportunity. We know that by the year 2050, there are going to be more deaths than cancer. We know currently that one person dies every 15 minutes in the US because of an antibiotic-resistant bacterial infection. And we have more coming through the regulatory process. Enteric protozoa, I talked about. I'm absolutely excited by that and what we can do in the US with a molecular test like that. We have an STI product, which we're putting through regulatory processes here in Australia. That's almost a $2 billion, annual market. So, our strategy, I think, is very clear that we're going to add more customers. We're going to add more testing targets, and ultimately we will build shareholder value.
And just on that, and we'll just finish on that, the share price has been disappointing, I suppose, given the environment you've been in, and your financials are strong, cash, profitable, a strong institutional register around 30%. What's the market missing here?
Well, it's very hard to comment on the market, Tim. I'll always get it wrong. I think some people may have interpreted that we are a new company and that we're doing COVID-only testing. And I think once they realize the depth to what we have, we are a 20-year-old company. We have Nobel laureates as on our scientific advisory board. There is a much depth to our company. We have many more projects to develop. We haven't even gotten onto the cancer detection type of product which molecular diagnostics are able to do, and we have a very strong position there given our 3-base technology. So I think, could speculate for a long time, Tim, but I think that when you have a look, certainly the pandemic has given us some things we can point to. There are some acquisitions were made in Europe for companies very similar to ours that got 19 times their 12-month revenue. If you look at them as a comparable, then I think the only conclusion you can come to is we are undervalued.